You're listening to the ProcureTech podcast, your weekly show for all that's cooking in the digital procurement space. Yes, we've got the hottest startups, thought leadership, and conversation from visionary industry experts, and definitely no stiff corporate content. I'm your host, James Meads, Procurement Pro, Digital Nomad, and ProcureTech fanboy. And now, here's this week's show. Yes, greetings and a very warm welcome to another episode of the ProcureTech podcast, your weekly dose of everything that is fun, innovative, and exciting in the digital procurement space. And we're definitely not going to give you any interviews on here that make you yawn. And one of the things that I really like doing and being in the position to do with the show is to be able to showcase a little bit the companies out there that may not be that well known, but have really innovative or really simple, very valuable solutions out there to help the wider audience understand a little bit more about what they do and the sort of value proposition that they have that maybe don't have a big marketing budget to be able to sponsor some of these conferences or sponsored content platforms. So both this week and next week, I'm going to be doing that. And this week, we're going to be talking to a company that solves a problem that I've really got frustrated with in the past, and that is vendor onboarding. Adding a new supplier in a big corporate organization can often feel like pulling teeth. And it's such a bureaucratic process. There's all of these documents and forms that internal audit and legal and whoever make everyone fill out. And if that's being done by Excel and email, it can often take weeks to do something that really should only take a day to get set up. So with my guest today, we're going to be having a conversation all around how a digitized, automated vendor management and vendor onboarding system can save you a lot of hassle and a lot of issues and a lot of avoidable cost further downstream in your procure to pay process. So without any further ado, here is this week's guest. So Nick Verkroost of OCG Software, very warm welcome to the ProcureTech podcast.
Thank you so much, James. Delighted to be here.
So this is a solution that you've developed that enables vendor onboarding and then the ongoing supplier management of master data. Maybe just briefly before we jump in, just give a quick introduction in terms of how you can, because you've been around a while, right? But this is a growing problem, I see.
Absolutely. I mean, we are absolutely passionate about master data and the value that data has to power your procurement operations. And actually, this was a business that was born out of a previous business that we had that was helping large companies to procure office supplies all across the UK, being able to aggregate and manage those orders for least cost routing. And it was that technology that morphed itself into actually becoming the master data hub of your organization. And so what the platform is really all about, it's about giving you as a procurement team visibility of your supply chain through your master data so that you can then take control of that and use the tools within the platform to actually drive your procurement operations. And that's what it's all about.
And I can actually tell a story of frustrations that I've experienced in the past around master data. It should be onboarding a supplier and getting a supplier into your system should be the easiest thing in the world. But in my personal experience, in a previous employer, it often took 2 weeks in some cases to get a supplier added. And why was that? Well, it was Excel and email based. The suppliers often didn't read the documents that you sent them through properly and just sent you whatever they felt like, rather than actually reading what our compliance requirements were. Stakeholders didn't understand the process, and yes, you could say that's just bad internal communication, which it was. But if you've got it all in an electronic format, that makes it much, much easier to manage. Approvals then often got routed to the wrong buyer, which then meant that they had to be rerouted to the right one. And in short, the end-to-end process, like I say, often took in excess of 2 weeks. In certain markets, we had more compliance requirements, rightfully so, because of emerging markets, having more corruption scandals and that type of thing. So I understand why the processes were in place. But what I'm getting at was that the actual procedure was just incredibly inefficient and painful. And, the age-old point of, why does someone who's on a strategic category manager salary, why should they be spending all of their time running around doing all of this administrative work? So with that said, who would be your typical client base for something like this?
So just to add to that point, I came into this actually as a supplier. So my pain point is the other side of exactly what you've described. So, you've got buyers in an organization who don't understand the purchase journey. You've got procurement teams who get frustrated with their buyers because they've just lobbed another, vendor over the fence to them and said, hey, can you get these guys set up with, no preamble, no explanation of what's going on.
And by the way, they've already delivered something and we need a PO yesterday.
Yeah, absolutely. Exactly. I mean, the number of times as a supplier that I've been told by my buyer, don't worry, I'll find a way around procurement is shocking. But also it just completely devalues the role that procurement have in the organization, which, why are we doing that? Why are we not trying to embrace that team and leverage them for all of the capability they've got? So, I came at this very much from the supplier's frustration, which is, we're just completely in the dark and we don't really understand what's going on. We don't understand why the process is taking so long and who we need to chase, call, email, whatever, to try and get that process moving on. And all the while, I've got Word documents and Excel spreadsheets of forms where I've input confidential information sent to various people in your organization. And I'm just very unclear as to what's happening with it. So the whole purpose of this is we need to create a mechanism by which you as a customer and me as a supplier can exchange master data in a very seamless and fluid manner, highly secure, fully auditable, so we understand what changes are being made and who's made the change and when. So we've got a complete history of what's going on, but also with a process that we've all understood aligns with the way in which you want to onboard someone into your organization. And that needs to be built into that process and give everyone the transparency. So that's really where we're coming from. And I think the challenge that we have at the moment, if you look at the market, there's a lot of technology out there. There's some fantastic solutions out in the market trying to hit on each of the various challenges that we have in procurement operations, whether that's in your RFP process or your contract management process, your source to pay suites, and all those kind of things. And each of them have their own onboarding mechanism, because to get that system working, I've got to get some information from the supplier to push them through my process. And so very quickly, you can end up as a procurement team with 3 or 4 different records of that individual supplier, each in a different system. Each of them have slightly different takes on the information. They don't have the same identification method, so it's very difficult to align those records with each other. They're accessible, obviously, to different people in the business because not everybody's involved in the RFP process. They may not come along until much later in the journey. And so it's almost impossible to build that holistic picture of what's going on. So that's really the issue that we're trying to tackle. Now, one of the challenges that comes in is if you are, say, a FTSE 100 company, you might look at this and say, you know what, I'm just going to solve the problem by going to one of the big source to pay suites or one of those guys. I can afford them. I'll have one system. I'll have everything under one roof, a single master record, and that should hopefully get me out of this mess. But the reality that we found from working with some of our big customers is that they may deploy 2 or 3 of these systems, and these are big name systems, and they'll still need us to come in at the center to hook all those different data points together. So something in there isn't quite working. And that's really where we came from, to try and provide that service.
And you hit on a couple of interesting little points there that I'd like to expand on a little bit, because you're right. If there are other tools out there on the market that offer some of this functionality from, what I understand, but usually it comes in conjunction with other functionality as well. An e-sourcing suite is a great example of this. that onboarding suppliers in an e-sourcing suite means onboarding them to enable them to participate in RFXs or in e-auctions, but it doesn't necessarily collate the level of master data that you need to get them set up as a new vendor that you're going to transact with further down the line. And I mean, I'm not an expert in these big enterprise level source to pay suites. I've never implemented one of those. I know people in my network that have, but again, they're not essentially master data management functionality, but they don't necessarily have master data functionality built into their software. I guess they exist to enable orders to be sent out and payments to be made, but some of the other things that you need as part of your onboarding, like compliance checks or like things like sustainability or corporate social responsibility surveys that you're probably going to be asking some of your bigger, more strategic vendors, it doesn't necessarily deal with that. So is it also with what you're doing within the reach of smaller businesses who just need a solution that don't have anything? Or are you marketing it more as an additional function for bigger companies that maybe are already using a procure to pay or an e-sourcing suite?
It's a brilliant question. So we actually started our journey as a partnership with two of what I would think of as the biggest companies in the world, both Fortune 500 businesses. One provides commercial property management services all over the world. The other supplies construction and mining machinery. You recognize both of their names in a heartbeat. And they came to us with the problem where they had these big systems and those systems weren't delivering for them. So is there a way in which we could construct something that can mediate that data exchange between ultimately their systems via their teams and their suppliers, and start to create that central hub? And that's how we started our journey. And they're obviously globally used today across their organizations. But actually where we've seen most success, and if you look at where most of our customer base has come from and where we're targeting ourselves, is actually towards that smaller and medium end of the market, who are still at this point in time reliant on things like Excel and Word documents to collect information.
There's a lot of big companies that are reliant on that as well, the truth be told.
Absolutely. But where the value of the system really starts to come in is, this isn't just about, okay, give me a nice clean data set, because that's brilliant. But what can you do once you've got that? I mean, the possibilities are endless once you've got a beautiful data set in front of you. I mean, one of the things I keep talking to the team about here is, if you think about the one of the fundamental challenges of procurement is that you've got to make a purchase decision trying to balance a whole host of different factors, right? Yes, spend is important, and how much I ultimately pay and whether I can generate a return on investment for what I'm buying from that supplier, that is a really important question. But I've got to balance that against risk. I've got to balance that against the quality of what I'm ultimately going to get from them. I've got to balance that against my environmental and diversity objectives as an organization, strategically where I'm trying to go. And ultimately, you're making a compromise. You can't have all of those things from a single supplier. You're going to have to take a judgment call as to which of those are most important. Well, how can you possibly do that if that information is siloed into multiple different systems? It just becomes impossible. And so your role actually gets increasingly more complex. So a lot of where we're seeing success, particularly at that sort of medium end of the market, is helping small procurement teams to augment their capability, where we'll start to automate some of those more mundane, manual, administrative tasks, which is where a lot of time is lost within that sort of transactional, operation of procurement, and release them to actually focus on what's more strategic and is going to really deliver value. And that's where we tend to see a lot of success.
So just a quick interlude, because there are a couple of things that I really want to make you aware of, because I think they will be valuable for you. So number one, we now have a monthly newsletter where we bring you curated content of everything that's happening in the digital procurement space. If you want to get that, just head to procuretechpodcast.com procurement.com/newsletter. Enter your name and email and we'll get that delivered straight to your inbox. Number 2, if you're a head of procurement or a center of excellence leader and you're perhaps a little bit confused or overwhelmed with what's out there as best of breed digital procurement technology, especially if you're a mid-sized business, schedule a call with me. There's a link at the bottom of the show notes in this episode. Just hit that schedule a call link and we can have a quick chat to understand your challenges and what potential solutions out there may be suitable for your organization. And now let's get right back to this week's show. And I think you've touched on that with the efficiencies that it brings to procurement teams in terms of taking that administrative work off of a category manager. Let's look at some of the potential issues. So let's look at the more of the bleeding neck problem, if you will. What are the potential issues of supplier vendor master data being inaccurate? Because if it's being managed through an ERP, you're going to get all of these problems like duplicates and incorrect bank data and vendor records not being updated because it's a reactive rather than a proactive process. So what issues come further downstream if your vendor master data is inaccurate?
Well, I mean, I think you've touched on some already. The problems really are endless. I mean, we're talking anything from at a fundamental operational level. I end up paying the wrong supplier, or I end up paying the supplier into the wrong bank account. Embarrassing. Obviously, I've got to try and recover that, and so forth. But further than that, we've seen the issues, the headlines, for example, Boohoo.com and the vendor they were working with to manufacture clothing, and obviously what happened when they realized that there was a lot of labor force there that probably shouldn't have been there. Those reputational issues can be incredibly damaging. If you enter into a relationship with a supplier who you really shouldn't have entered into a relationship with, that can affect you for many years down the line. So those problems, I think we're still at a point as an industry of really understanding how it's bad data that is informing some of those bad decisions, and how improving the quality of that data is going to start to help you become a better business. But, I think it's starting now. And, what I think has been, if you like, a silver lining of the pandemic is that we've all suddenly realized that the quality of our master data is terrible, to the extent that we don't even have the phone numbers of our suppliers to call them up and ask them if they're okay and if they need any help.
Yeah, or email addresses are out of date or whatnot. Yeah, and just people move on to different functions, don't they? So if a key account manager's email address was entered into the vendor master, and then he or she moves on to a different role, it's just a constantly moving target, isn't it? So, I mean, that leads me on actually to what I wanted to ask you next, and it's not necessarily just this particular issue, but I think it's one that's most commonplace. What are the problems with vendor duplications, and how can this damage your procurement data, and how can something like the solution that OCG has go about cleaning or rectifying this to make it sort of a single source of truth, which is, I suppose, the buzzword at the moment?
Well, I think duplication is a huge topic, and it's a real challenge. It's a real problem. I think we are all getting much better understanding of where it's coming from and why it's originating. We talked before about the problem of having, multiple ERPs, multiple different systems that are being used to execute on a particular component of the procurement function, but those records obviously not talking to each other. Ultimately, we all have a role in fixing this. This isn't something that a piece of technology is going to come in and miraculously, clean up for you. So, what's our role in this? Very simply, what we try to do is we try to flag to the user where we're seeing duplications, and then allow a human to ultimately make the decision about what you want to do with that. There are systems out there that will claim to use a clever piece of AI to try and dedupe your data and all that kind of stuff. In our experience, they don't work particularly well because they just don't have the context of your business to be able to make a decision for you. I think where technology has a more valuable role is just making you aware of the problem. I think it's then up to you ultimately as an organization through your people and processes to determine what's the best way about going about cleaning that up. But where it really starts to get tricky, and where something like our system can start to come into its own, is in areas like, say, compliance data, for example. So, We work with a customer of ours. PwC is one of their suppliers. I don't know if you know, but in the UK, PwC has 17 different legal entities, each providing a different set of services. Now,
I didn't know that. Every day's a school day.
Yeah, I mean, it's phenomenal, isn't it, how some of these organizations structure themselves. Now, from a spend perspective, you might be more interested in trying to understand how much are we spending with PwC as a whole, because you're trying to renegotiate a global contract, or you're trying to help, use that to leverage a better position in that discussion. But from a compliance perspective, each legal entity has its own obligations to you. They're all going to have their own insurance. They're each going to need to adhere to your policies in a different way. They're all going to run health and safety in a different way. So you need to have a system that's capable of handling that level of complexity. On the one hand, I don't want to see duplicate records of PwC because I just need to see them all wrapped up as one spend number. But on the other hand, it matters to me that one part of their organization is compliant to provide a set of services and the other isn't, for one reason or another. So you need to have some technology that can handle that for you.
And that kind of leads into looking at different compliance levels, different onboarding processes for different types of vendors, because you're inevitably, if you're dealing in a risky market, or if you're dealing with trading commodities or that type of thing, where your supply chain could potentially be quite dirty or need to stand up to audits, that's an area where you're going to need more compliance and maybe asking more questions with your onboarding to ensure that your supply base is matching your own standards around ethics. But then on the other hand, if you've just got some small company in a developed market that you're just going to transact with 2 or 3 times a year, that it's overkill, isn't it? And that's what upsets small businesses and makes it so hard for them to do business with larger corporates, is because, a 5-person business that's maybe developing a niche little piece of software for HR, they're not going to have a diversity policy or a sustainability policy or any of that type of stuff. And rightly so, as a business that size. So how can you differentiate then the onboarding process using a tool like this so as it's tailored towards vendors in a more sort of common sense ethos?
Well, that's really where our rules engine starts to come into its own. So, we will look at a supplier, and the system configured ultimately by the customer based on their understanding of what's important to them. We'll be able to look at the supplier, look at the request that's been made by the buyer to onboard them into the system, and understand, okay, what is the right onboarding pathway to take that supplier down? As you said, are they, a small business? It's a one-off spend. It's relatively low risk in terms of the service they're providing or the country or site they're providing it to. So, there's some very simple compliance we can cover off, but ultimately this is about collecting the correct trading information so I can pay them and we can put them down a much lighter path. But there are others, take a electrician providing high voltage maintenance services. Maybe they're doing something on the roof of a building. Suddenly the risk is much greater. You've got somebody physically coming on site. You've got somebody potentially in a risky situation in that building. It's important that I make sure that they do have the correct documentation, permits and licenses in place before they come in and start to do that. You may even want to have them complete some training, for the site they're coming into. Maybe we work with them building a nuclear power plant, here in the UK, and you can imagine the kind of level of checks that needs to take place before an individual subcontractor to come on site. So you've got to create that variation. The only way to do that is by having a system that can look at the supplier and understand, all right, this is the pathway I would take you down, and make sure that that's adhered to.
And that's having the necessary agility to be able to balance the risk, in terms of, what do internal audit or risk management need to satisfy their requirements, but at the same time, applying a degree of common sense for a vendor that is seen as low risk.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I think this is part of the course, which is, and I'll say it again, technology on its own doesn't solve problems. Technology is one component of a trifecta. With people and processes. You could even add data into there as well and actually call it 4 fundamental pillars. What we're doing is we're looking after your data, and we're providing you with the tools to be able to start automating some of your processes. But ultimately, it's down to the incredibly talented people within your procurement teams and the processes that they adhere to make sure that you're executing in the way that you think is correct. And we should be using that. We're not robots. We shouldn't be allowing technology to just entirely drive every decision that we make. The technology is there to support us, to present information to us in the right way. But ultimately, we've hired an incredibly talented team of people. They're the guys who should be trying to take that decision for you.
Be like Nick if you're listening to this and you're a procurement leader. Don't force nonsense onto your procurement teams. I love that. Okay.
Well, it's true, isn't it? Otherwise we'd automate the world, and wouldn't it be boring?
If you're facilitating here more of a sort of self-serve model that suppliers can upload all of their documents into the system and it would automatically trigger what they need to do with as few touch points with an actual procurement person as possible, there's always a risk that they just don't do it. So how do you ensure that the system stays up to date, or that suppliers don't just send emails to the buyer or the accounts person instead?
Well, so you've got to try and recognize that this is a two-way relationship. At the end of the day, the reason that you're doing business with that supplier is because they have something of value that can drive your business forward. Let's just bring it back to first principles. That's ultimately why we're here. And there's an agreement in place that in return for that, the supplier is going to get compensated for the work that they're going to do. And everyone's happy. We've both built a successful business. We can both be proud of what we've delivered. And, hopefully there's a long-term partnership there, into the future. So it's a two-way relationship. And that information exchange similarly has to be a two-way relationship. So you can't go into this, with your list of demands of all the things that you need that supplier to prove to you, sort of like the compliance police coming along and, cracking the whip and saying, hey, supplier, you're guilty till proven innocent, which, I have to say, having been a supplier, sometimes it does feel like that, going through some of these processes. You've got to recognize that the supplier also has some very important information they need to get from you as well, such as, well, how should I invoice? Where should I collect my purchase orders? Who am I supposed to talk to? I mean, the number of times as a supplier, you're sitting there scratching your head going, you know what? I don't actually know who in the organization I need to contact about this particular issue. My buyer doesn't know the accounts at inbox, which is the only way I get to talk to the finance team. They don't know either. Who is it that I should talk to about a particular issue? So if you can create that exchange of information, what you end up with is a situation where you're empowering the supplier to actually want to update their information and maintain their record, because they're getting something in return from that as well. So that's really important in terms of the way in which we set the platform up, that it's not just a one-way dialogue. This is something where the supplier can come in and actually be proud of the profile that they've built. And then, once you've done that, you can start to think about, all right, where are there other opportunities? So, for example, for my preferred supplier list, say, would it be interesting for them to be able to submit some marketing information to me through the portal, so I'm kept up to date with some of the latest product and technology developments they might be working on? Is it interesting that I can start to collaborate with them over a particular piece of innovation, which has happened before, on our system and, has been very successful for both the supplier and the customer in that particular instance. So, you start to create that opportunity for there to be a conversation that takes place. But obviously, fundamentally at the core of it, this is about maintaining that master record and ensuring you've got all the information in one place.
And there are two things that I will take from that. The first thing is that people and process and technology mashed together, they're the three ingredients for success. You can't just automate a crap process. And the other one is, once you've got the foundations right, you can obviously build on that and use a platform such as this as more of an exchange of information, so as things like marketing presentations or new product developments don't get stuck on someone's C drive or in their inbox and then they leave the company or move on to another role. It's and that happens more than we like to admit.
Absolutely.
I mean, as a buyer, right, it's happened to me. I've gone into a new category and I've had a handover, but then the person's left. And, in the best case, you actually get a handover. The person leaves and then you realize that they've taken half the stuff with them on their C drive. And it happens more often than we'd like to admit. So final question, Nick, and this one's a really easy one. If anyone would like to learn more about this or get in touch with you, what's the best place for people to contact you?
You can head straight to our website. There's the ability to contact us through there. There's also lots of information on there, from work that we've done in the past and, access to case studies and, some of the information that we're putting out there. We also run a monthly procurement roundtable, which is, certainly for me has been a really inspiring journey to meet such an incredible group of people. I'm not traditionally from the procurement industry. I'm from the other side. I'm from the supplier side, and it's been fantastic to run these sessions. These take place monthly, entirely virtual, usually with a guest speaker, where we pick a topic and we start talking about it. And if you'd like to be part of that, then please feel free to get in touch and let me know, and I will certainly add you to the guest list.
Nick, it's been great speaking to you and learning more about what this can do. And I think we're both singing from the same hymn sheet here, that this is a pretty simple problem to solve if you have the right people and the right processes, and you can get the tech to do the heavy lifting. So thanks again for coming on the show. All the best and speak soon.
Thanks so much, James. Wonderful to be here.
So that, ladies and gentlemen, really does show that people, processes and technology collaborating or working together in a harmonized way is really essential for any digital transformation success. And something as simple really as vendor master and vendor onboarding and vendor data management is a classic example of how things often go wrong when the process is not thought out or when the people are not engaged in making it work, regardless of what digital technology you have that's driving it. If indeed you do have any, a lot of people are still using email and Excel to do this. So thank you for listening to another episode. I do appreciate every one of you that tunes in. There are a lot of other procurement podcasts out there now, and I'm very, very happy that you've chosen to listen to us. We'll be back again same time next week. Until then, look after yourself, keep being productive and driving value, and see you soon. Bye-bye.